welcome to your daily discussions with Dena. As always, you are invited to like, share, and subscribe and leave your comment. I have an interesting report that I wanted to share on the descendants of Alabama slave owner who say they are figuring out their next steps to make amends to the descendants of Africans who were kidnapped and brought to America to be slaves. That's right. Recently, descendants of Africans that were captured or stolen from Africa and held captive on the slave ship called Clotilda met with the descendants of the enslaver, Timothy Meyer. Now, Anderson Cooper of 60 Minutes was there and sat in the middle of the conversation. He was there like the middleman to observe and ask questions as members of the two groups of people met to discuss what they described as reconciliation by the black descendants of the slaves. Now, this happened this year, but I wanted to note the choice of words here that were used. It is called reconciliation. This was the word used by the black people that were there, as if to avoid saying reparations or reparations, which are owed and due to the American descendants of slaves. Now, that's right. The government of America still has an outstanding debt that is owed to us this very day, to the slave and its black descendants. It still has yet to come to the table or even to honestly and sincerely begin the process of righting the wrong that they sanctioned, they enforced, and they legalized slavery and brutality and torture against black people. So the government of America has crossed many oceans and seas trying to convince others that they are the moral authority, yet continues to avoid and ignore their role in the complete destruction of a people right here on America's soil. But again, what is reconciliation exactly? Now, reconciliation is defined as the restoration of friendly relations or the action of making one view or belief compatible with another, the restoration of friendly relations. Reconciliation does not raise one from the condition they find themselves in, but it just seems like a feel-good conversation for the most part. Reconciliation should not just, it can take place, but it should not take place without intent or including reparation. We know very well how to be kind and speak to one another, or as some would say, how to code switch when it is necessary. But the kindest and most sincere thing that a person can do to atone for the wrong that they have done is to begin the process of repairing the person that you caused harm to. And yes, that includes financial compensation. You can't say it happened so and so years ago, because we're still feeling the effects of it, of being deprived of simple things. So even though speaking and behaving nicely for the moment is good, for that particular moment, of course, what we need and what we should not be afraid to say or demand is repair from what slavery has done to us mentally, physically, spiritually, and financially as a group of people. And that is just an honest conversation that should and must be held when it comes to the descendants of former slaves and their slave masters, their former slave masters' descendants, and the descendants of slaves here in America. And I don't think we should pussyfoot around the issue, because it doesn't get us anywhere. And that's why we keep going over these same old conversations that lead to nowhere, because I don't think that the intent is for it to go anywhere at this point in our existence here in America. But what exactly is reparations, and what does it look like? It is the making of amends for a wrong that has been done. You can pay money, of course, as compensation, or you can pay in resources or you can start the process of repairing. It's not difficult. Compensation can come in many forms, but must include financial payment. It is the one thing that was deliberately kept from us, and that is wealth. The opportunity to acquire it, the ability to control what it is, and when we get wealth, all of this was taken away, and even what we were allowed to purchase with it. And why? The enslaver's intent was to have black former slaves remain second class citizens, perpetually in servitude to the slave master. So while they, descendants of slave owners, received generational wealth that was passed down as a result of slave labor, we, the descendants of slaves, receive nothing or very little to leave or to pass down to future generations of black people here in America. Mostly just heartache, pain, and the burden of poverty, and many times debt. And the debt comes from trying just to survive day to day. Now, 60 Minutes has followed the story of the Clotilda, which is said to be the last known ship to bring slaves from Africa to America. It began when Timothy Mayer, who was a wealthy businessman, hired Captain William Foster to illegally smuggle a ship loaded full of captive black people, Africans from the kingdom of Dahomey, which is now the modern day Benin. These were stolen black people that were taken to Mobile, Alabama. Slavery was still legal in the southern United States in 1860 when Timothy Mayer hired Captain Foster, but importing enslaved people or slaves into America had been outlawed since 1808. So Mayer sent this ship to the kingdom of Dahomey. And this was in West Africa, where Foster in his journal described purchasing the people that they stole using $9,000 in gold. Now the Africans were locked up, they were chained up, they were butt naked in the cargo hold of the Clotilda ship. 45 days it took for this group of men, women, and children to arrive here. And they were handed over to Mayer, who divided them up between himself, his brother, I think his name was Burns, and several others. Captain Foster claimed he then burned and sank the Clotilda, but exactly where this ship was remained a mystery. That is, of course, until 2018. And in 2018, a local reporter by the name of Ben Raines found the Clotilda in about 20 feet of water next to land that is still owned by the Mayer family. In 2019, CBS 60 Minutes began reporting on this discovery of this sunken slave ship that was found at the bottom of the Alabama River. Clotilda was finally discovered. It is the very last ship known to have brought captured Africans to America in 1860. So in July 1860, the Clotilda was said to have been towed here after the 45-day voyage from West Africa with the 110 souls on board. But what exactly happened to these men, women, and children that were aboard the Clotilda? It is said to be documented, and that there are many stories that have been passed down to their descendants from generation to generation. These descendants still live close by. In fact, they live a few miles from where the ship was actually discovered. And this community that they live in is called Africatown today. Since the Clotilda's discovery, Africatown is said to have received $10 million in city, state, federal, and philanthropic funds that have gone specifically to the revitalization of Africatown. Now, one of the stolen African men, whose name was Aluale, had his name changed by his white enslaver to his slave name Charlie Lewis. And his direct descendants are Joycelyn Davis, Lorna Gale Woods, and Thomas Griffin. Another African by the name of Kupali, who was given the slave name Polly Allen. He is the ancestor of Jeremy Ellis and Darren Patterson. Now, it is said that the Clotilda survivors were freed after 5 years of slavery. Cosulu, whose enslaver called him Cujo Lewis, was among them. The survivors asked Timothy Meagher to help them return them to Africa, but he refused. And in the 1914 interview with Cosulu, Meagher also tried to prevent them from voting. Some were even said to have found work in a sawmill that Meagher owned as well. How ironic. But in 1868, 3 years after emancipation, 30 of the freed Africans from this Clotilda ship, they are the ones that actually founded Africatown. Now, the only surviving community is said to be, or believed to be, the only surviving community in America that was known to be founded by Africans. Some of their descendants still call it home today. It has a population around 800 people, and that number is said to be down from the 12,000 back in the 1960s. And as always, or at least as we can expect, there is an interstate highway that was built right through the middle of Africatown in the early 1990s. And now the small group of remaining homes are surrounded by factories and chemical plants. This has been a very common occurrence in our Black neighborhoods in America. But recently, the descendants of these enslaved Africans and the descendants of the enslavers who bankrolled their voyage to America sat down together in a historic meeting to talk. And the TV show 60 Minutes was there with their reporter Anderson Cooper, observing, recording, and asking questions to each member of the group. This is indeed a historical meeting, and the reason why it is historical is because this family is doing what the American government has not the guts to do, and it has never honestly done this. They like to pretend as if they're doing meetings and studies that lead nowhere. It is a mere front, sometimes to pacify Black people into voting, or to kind of keep you hanging on with thoughts or hope. But there is nothing financial or feasible that ever comes from these meetings. Nothing is generated that is tangible. We know that from the past, reparations and financial compensation has been paid to other groups from the United States government, other groups in other countries. Like I'm told today that Mexicans are actually receiving a form of reparations from the United States government. We saw Afghanistanians coming in. They received reparations from the United States government. The Japanese, Israel, Ukraine, and billions is given to assist illegal immigrants right before our very eyes. Now, at this point, we, Black descendants of slaves in America, desire quantifiable compensation as well. We want actual resources included in reparations, not the facade of more studies on slavery or the need for it, because we know it is there. It's actual and it's factual. And we don't even need to include or try to connect any other group of people to our struggle. Our groups in our compensation for slavery are concluding that non-descendants of slaves get to determine what is best for us, our needs, forms of repair, and what is in our best interest when it comes to what we do with the reparations that are owed and paid to us. None of these rules or guidelines were ever instituted or required of any other group that were compensated by America, and there should not be a special exception to the descendants of slaves as well. It is concrete resolution and intentional financial amends that are necessary here in America to the Black descendants of slaves. No, we cannot leave out financial payments. Now, in Alabama, the descendants of Meagher had refused to meet with the descendants of the enslaved Africans that were brought to America on the ship Clotilda. Even when 60 Minutes reached out to 4 members of the Mir family in 2020, they all either declined or didn't respond to requests for an interview at all. But last year, a new generation of the Mirs took control of the family business, and over the last year, they explored what they might do to make it amends. So in July, some of the descendants actually met in a conference room at Mobile's History Museum, and 60 Minutes aired a small portion of this historic meeting. As the Clotilda descendants, Pat Frazier, the great-granddaughter of Lottie Dennison. Frazier was representing the Clotilda Descendants Association with Joycelyn Davis and organization president Jeremy Ellis. They sat across from Meg Mir and her sister Helen, great-great-granddaughters of Timothy Mir.
I previously thought that this day would never happen, ladies, because people kept saying the mayors have kept quiet. We've tried to approach them. They've only spoken through their lawyers.
Pat Frazier was representing the Clotilda Descendants Association, along with Joycelyn Davis and its president, Jeremy Ellis.
My hope is that this can be an example of what reconciliation looks like for the nation, as well as start the healing process for a number of descendants.
Everybody has this perception that, maybe we're angry.
Are you angry at the mayors?
I'm not angry at the mayors. I'm just angry at the fact that it took so long to speak out.
We were silent for far too long, and we were distant for far too long. And we're very happy to be able to finally break the silence and to narrow the distance.
Same conversation America would rather not have or deal with because they know much is owed into the descendants of slaves. Watching the meeting, each group appeared a bit timid at first to me, but polite, and seemed like the Caucasian family were afraid that something bigger would come from this and that it would be costly to them. That was the impression I got. And the Black family seemed as if they were almost fearful, starting the meeting by stressing that they weren't asking for reparations, but rather reconciliation, which I, again, personally thought was pusillanimous. Seems they were fearful almost that the mayors would remove themselves from the conversation and respond as America, the American government, does, by ignoring, denying, or simply dismissing the conversation altogether, which is kind of understandable. But in the end, they had an interesting, somewhat thought-provoking conversation in which Joycelyn Davis shared with them that her ancestors' journey, her thoughts on it. She said, I just imagined myself being on that ship, just listening to the waves and the water and just not knowing where you were going. And many of us have wondered and thought what was going through their heads at that time. All of us who have sincerely thought about it, you always imagine yourself being on that ship and what it was that they were feeling, and it's an emotional thing. But Darren Patterson shared his thoughts and said, no clothes, eating where they defecated, only allowed out of the cargo hold for 1 day a week for 2 months. How many people do we know now that could have survived like that without losing their mind, which is a question you ask yourself all the time. But Frazier said the Mir sisters are not responsible for what their ancestors did. However, I want them to recognize how their behavior benefited them and worked to the disadvantage of us, she stated. Just like they've had multiple generations of wealth, the original slaves and their descendants haven't. Amen, said. We believe that the same level of education should be provided to our descendants, and that's true. An issue within Africatown is that it still bears the name of Mir, who is the white man who actually enslaved the ancestors of some of the people that are still living there. Now, Mir stated we were silent for far too long, and we were distanced for far too long. And we're happy to be able to finally break the silence to narrow the distance. Mayer said the family doesn't want to act in any way that generates conflict among Africatown's supporters. Now, Helen Mayer said, our family is like some other families. We have lots of layers and complexities and some dysfunctions, and we have been in like a lawsuit like among family members, she said, and that finally resolved just a year ago. So like now it's really it's our generation that's been able to step up. The mayors agree that the markers can go, and the program shows one of the markers actually being pulled up from the ground. She said we can work to remove those monuments, and that is just a small step at it, but it's not something you have to see every day. And so it is the first step that they can take, is what they said. I think we need to see something even more generous from them. But she hopes that in 10 years, Africatown will be a thriving community. Now, if you're interested in seeing and hearing this full interview or report, you can check it out on 60 Minutes. Now, even though I found it interesting and somewhat monumental, I don't know if anything will come from this, because the conversations have been going on for centuries. It's enough. We need tangibles. So like I said, it's like what we have been seeing from the government of America, which is nothing. We need to see something. As always, you are invited to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your comment on this topic of discussion.